Oh, I love this. I get to speak with Katie. This is so fun and such a blessing. And I love this group, as you guys know. This is my favorite group, my Moms by Design. So I have kind of a funny story to start out with. Liz asked me to talk a while ago, picked January 18th as the date. And then I thought, I think it'd be fun to ask Katie to speak with me. And did you ever have, which is my worst nightmare, did you ever text something to the wrong person? Well, I did that. And this is so typical of me. I asked someone to speak with me, and I thought I was texting Katie. And it wasn't Katie, it was Liz. And you know Liz, she's highly accommodating, and I don't think she knew what to do when Terri Koschnick is saying, Liz, I didn't say Liz. I said, could you speak with me? I would love to speak with you at Moms by Design.
And hadn't she just asked you to speak like a minute earlier?
Maybe. She had just asked me to speak, and then I go, could you speak with me? And poor Liz, I haven't even talked to her about this, but she starts scrambling in her response to me. And I think it's so funny because she's like trying to validate me and accommodate me, but she goes on and on and on and on, rather than, no, I'm not gonna speak with you. I am the director of the moms.
Yeah, she had COVID. Yeah.
What was your response, Liz? Were you like, I cannot believe she is actually asking me to do this? Did you actually think that?
No, I was just like, she's gonna do this on her own.
Oh my gosh, I laughed so hard. Ask Katie, I called her crying, I was laughing so hard. Here's her response. Okay, now I want you to think about how you would respond. She goes, hey, Bill and I have both been battling COVID for the past week, and I've had both Moms by Design and Bible study kicking off, so I really wouldn't have time to prepare anything to speak, but I know the ladies really want to hear from you. Are you still able to speak? If not, we can maybe find another time. So she scrambles around and gives all these excuses why she's not going to be able to do it. And I go, oh my gosh. That's so typical of women, and that's what we're talking about today. How women's brains function, the importance of friendship, the importance of connection, the importance of bonding. But if any of you have heard me before, I like to talk about the brain and how women's brains are very different than men's brains. And just to give an overview, women's brains have much more white matter than gray matter than men. Women's brains, when they process information, go from right to left. Men go from front to back. Men's brains have a strong corpus callosum that has a division that creates a very different kind of thinking process, right versus left, where women think all over their brain all the time. Women have a bigger verbal center in their brain, and they have a bigger emotional center in their brain, which means women need to, love to, and have to talk. Women need to talk because we verbally process information through our words, and we process emotion. Men don't do that, and they don't like it. In the Amen Clinic, who is notorious for imaging brains. They image brains. They take scans of brain activity. They found when they scanned women's brains that women they scanned 80 regions of the brain. 70% of the regions of the brain had more activity in women than men, which I think is interesting. Women's brains are busier. I thought it was interesting. They said men's brain, it's a little more quiet. And they use the word quiet. The reason I'm talking about this is God did make our brains very different. That emotional center that I'm talking about is the limbic system of the brain. We have much more emotion, which creates a need for bonding. We're better nurturers. We're much more relational, and we have a need to connect that's different than men. The other part of that is the limbic system that has the deep emotional part of the brain also can get depressed easier. We're 4 times more likely than men to get depressed if we don't have those relational connections, or if something goes askew in our brain, we can get depressed. We also have something that's called the anterior cingulate gyrus, which is simply the switching part of our brain. We get stuck on, which I think a lot of you can relate to, we'll get stuck on negative thoughts. We'll ruminate, we'll worry. Things will go over and over in our brain, and we can get stuck on worry, and we can get locked into it. That's why women are 5 times more likely to be anxious. We also have much more of an intuitive sense. Because our brains have a lot of activity, we're very aware of the emotional and the logic together, so we're highly intuitive. All of this to say, God created us that way. And we really want to value the way God made us, but one way He made us, and Katie and I are going to be talking about this today, is really the importance of friendship. Friendship is about connection, and today we're going to talk about the connection with other women. When women talk, when women connect, something happens in their brains. There's a chemical release of dopamine, serotonin, endorphins, and in that release, they're the feel-good chemicals that come from friendship, and I love that. And the research supports that. When you get into difficult situations, when life deals you hardship, the Bible talks about trials, friends are number one survival for us. And I'm going to use the word survival to kind of work through it. They did a research study that I thought was interesting. 148 studies, 300,000 people in 7 years. They found that there's a greater increase of survival through anything if you have a strong support system. And the support system is friends. We do need social connections. I had an interesting thing happen at work that I think is interesting. I'll share with you. I had a group of women. They were all going through the same thing. So they were going through a divorce, and they're going through difficult relationship struggles, I'm going to say. And I found the common denominator, that they were having problems and probably on the way to divorce. I put them all together. And I thought, I'm just going to create a group. And I put 6 or 7 of these women together. And something interesting happened. I thought it would be like a support group. I could talk, kind of educate on what's going on, and we would have a counseling group. But something emerged out of that group that I thought was very interesting. It became a very effective group that's been together for 2.5 years. But the reason it's so effective is they became friends with each other. Outside of this little group, they started meeting at restaurants and each other's home. And when one would go through a divorce, they would all show up and support her. They would all group text. I was on the text, so I knew. Hey, I'm thinking about you today. I'm there with you. Hey, let's meet at Chili's tonight to help so-and-so and support her. And what I found was, and I've had a lot of these women say, Terri, thank you so much for putting the group together. Not because I did anything, but it created a forum, an arena for them to connect to each other. And that's what's deeply, deeply helped them. At a time of loneliness, at a time of feeling isolated, at a time of feeling, well, I know I'm the only one going through this. They heard, no, I am too. And that bonded them, which I love that. And here's what I'm going to talk about right now. It's we're created by God into 4 kind of elements of who we are. It's the physical, which is our body, mental, which is our brains, how we think, emotional, which is our feeling, and spiritual, which is our connection to God. That's how God created us. When we break down physically, we get sick. When we break down emotionally, we get lonely. We can be very lonely. Break down spiritually, we're not connected to God. Break down physically, mentally, we can't really think or concentrate. But let's talk about loneliness. And I know Katie's going to talk about this too. But loneliness is so hard. And there are so many women that are lonely. And loneliness, which I thought was so interesting, it's an emotional state of kind of being in despair. It's different than solitude. As moms with young children, you probably like solitude, right? Like, give me solitude. It's not solitude. It's deeply lonely, having an emptiness. And what they found is loneliness and extended loneliness is as detrimental to your health as, now listen to this fascinates me, smoking 15 cigarettes a day, being an alcoholic, being obese, and not exercising at all. That has the same detrimental effect as loneliness. And we are in an epidemic of loneliness. It also has physical effects of cardiovascular disease, dementia, and as we spoke earlier, what I see in my practice is depression and anxiety. So we really want to focus today on friendship. And I want you to think about your friends. Who comes to mind when I say friendship? And on a 0 to 10, how close is your friendship? 10 being very close, 0 not at all. 50 to 70% of women say that they only have maybe a level 5 or less friendship. Meaning, yeah, I've got friends, but I don't have this closeness. I don't have the closeness. And really, we're going to talk about what brings us closeness to people. 3 things they've identified: positivity, consistency, and vulnerability are needed in relationships. Positivity is women in relationships need validation, they need affirmation, and women are very good at this. Oh, I know how you feel. And we affirm each other, we validate each other, we are positive in our interactions. And we as friends need to be that for each other. Validate. You're listening, you're hearing, and you're validating. The other thing that's really important is consistency. And by consistency, we're talking about regular time that you make. And that's why Moms by Design is really important. It's a consistent time that you're meeting. I think it's every other week, right? Or is it every week?
Every other?
Every other week. It's consistent. Bible studies, women's groups like Moms by Design, church, a book club, anything that becomes consistent and regular, that puts you in contact with the same people, builds consistency of time. Church is important. And then lastly, vulnerability. Women need to take a risk, and this is hard for women, but to be vulnerable, to talk about what you're feeling, to open up, to not just create a facade that everything's okay, because chances are it's not okay. Something's going on. Take a risk with your friend, open up, be vulnerable. And then last, I'm going to touch on my personal favorite thing to talk on is social media and what it's not. It's a counterfeit to friendship. It will leave you lonelier, more empty. And completely, I don't care how many hours you spend on it, it's going to leave you feeling very lonely. And the reason is vulnerability. You're not vulnerable. Most of us, and I go on Facebook, we're projecting an image, a picture of what we want people to see. But it's not a vulnerability, it's a projection of an image. It tends to be more superficial. I had a sister-in-law, Kim. You know Kim. I have two Kims, but this is my husband's sister. I love her, but she's really good at projecting images. You know those people that just project a nice life? She's phenomenal at this. First of all, she's beautiful, but she's always projecting this wonderful, beautiful image of everything. And there was one particular time that she projected this really fun day. I'm like, oh, I want to do that. She was on a boat on the Milwaukee River. It was her birthday. It was sunny. She's on this with her girlfriends on the Milwaukee River. I'm like, oh, that looks so fun. I'm so jealous right now of that day. And so when I saw her, I said, hey, tell me about that day on the river. That looked really fun. And of course, she's like, fun day on the river. It's my birthday. I'm with my friends. Beautiful setting. I go, tell me about that. She goes, oh, that day, it was terrible. I go, it was? She said, yeah, the boat broke down in the middle of the river. She said, it was hot. They were all crabby. We had to wait 3 hours for someone to come and fix our boat. I go, but that's not what the picture looked like. She goes, oh, I know that. And I laughed so hard with her, and our bonding experience came in the connection around what the day really was. Because we talked about it, we laughed, and we were just able to connect. And I thought to myself, I feel so much closer to her around her being vulnerable and telling what really happened versus an image that she projected on Facebook. You can't get that on Facebook. Facebook is a counterfeit. I'm not saying don't go on Facebook. I'm saying don't use it to replace friendships, connection, and a sense of bonding. It'll leave you lonely and empty. You'll get an immediate dopamine hit when you get a like or get a positive comment. You'll get that little brain connection, but it's not real and it's not sustainable. So to end, I just want to say we need each other, we need friendship, we need to bond. This group plays a really important role, and I'm going to just challenge you, if you don't have a good friend, to identify someone in your life that would be a really good friend and be very intentional on developing a relationship with them. And I know it's scary because women, and I talk to women all the time, they don't like to put themselves out there. Well, what if she's busy? She has a busy life. Maybe she doesn't want to hear from me. She does. And just put yourself out there. Say you want to go for coffee. Do you want to go out and have lunch? And just pursue that friendship. And it's going to give you a stronger, emotional, stable sense of self. Okay, thank you. Now, Katie.
Great. I know my mom shared some data on loneliness. I want to add to that a little bit. So when we talk about the loneliness epidemic, I have some data points up here that show us that more than 1/3 of Americans, this is in the past year, have felt serious loneliness. Loneliness is defined as the feeling of being alone, regardless of the actual amount of social contact. So that means you can be around people and still suffer from loneliness. You could be around people all day, all the time, and still be lonely. A study of older adults found that social isolation was linked with a 50% increased risk of dementia and other serious medical conditions. And social isolation has been found to have an effect on premature death to the same extent as smoking, obesity, and physical activity. It's linked to higher rates of anxiety, depression, and suicide. The one that really stuck out to me for this group was the fact that 51% of young moms report feeling serious loneliness. That's not just loneliness. That was a different threshold and a higher number. This was serious loneliness. So that's more than 1/2. Representative of this group today of young moms are feeling that loneliness. And that was during the pandemic. And so there was all sorts of kind of analysis and speculation as to why that would be. But what I want to do is I want to take a moment to kind of step back and talk about our culture that we live in and the Western culture and how maybe our cultural frames set the tone for how we interact with each other, how we curate relationships, and how we live in community. When we talk about the Western culture, many of you probably know it's highly individualistic. We're very focused on our individual selves, our rights. The American dream is the idea of pursuing, your dreams, and you can be whatever you want to be. There's a lot of good in that. But there can also be some darker sides. I found a good de Tocqueville quote. It's a little heavy, but I really thought it was spot on and I wanted to share it. He said that one of the dangers in a democracy like America's is that individualism can create a false sense of independence, such that we start to think that we owe nothing to anyone. In the end, each citizen is habitually occupied in contemplating a very small object, which is himself. But this individualistic view of freedom is not actually biblical. For Jesus, biblical freedom is always relational and always tied to love of God and love of others. God's wisdom for the good, beautiful life is the cruciform life. And the cruciform life means that everything must be reinterpreted in light of the cross. So he's saying that in this Western world, not only do we have a culture that's highly individualist, but we have a faith. We've created a faith that's highly individual and highly focused on ourselves. So in what ways have we over-individualized faith? A couple examples that came to my mind. One is this idea of the prosperity gospel. If you've heard of the prosperity gospel, it's this teaching that God wants you to have health, wealth, success, comfort, like a great life. That's actually not true. That's counter to what we see in the Bible. That's not, of course, God wants us to thrive and to be who he created us to be, but it's actually, he calls us to a self-sacrificial life where we are constantly giving up our good in pursuit of the good of others and in pursuit of God's kingdom. The other one is the focus on atonement, or individual destiny. So growing up, I heard a lot about Jesus died on the cross for you, and if you pray this prayer, you'll go to heaven. Okay, that's not wrong, that's true. But when we over-focus on our individual destiny, right, like I prayed this prayer, now I'm going to heaven, I think we do that to the detriment of focusing on living out faith communally. Like, what does it mean for the here and now, living amongst all of God's people and being image bearers of God? There's a lot of focus on individual obedience. So kind of this idea that, okay, I'm going to heaven, but while I'm here, I just want to try not to sin and I want to be holy and do the right thing. Again, a lot of focus on ourselves. Again, that's a piece of faith. It's not all of faith. And again, we tend to miss out on what it means to live out faith communally. I think we tend to put a high emphasis on individual prayer and quiet time, where it's like, okay, I'm a Christian, I'm going to start my day maybe with some time with God, and then I'm going to go around my day and never talk about faith and never really think about it much, as opposed to thinking of faith as all of life, including how we interact with people and how we live out communally. I was talking to a friend recently who read a book called Misreading the Gospel with Western Eyes. I haven't read it, it's on my list, but I had a long conversation with her and I said, okay, here's what I'm talking about, like download on me what you learned from this book. And she shared two things I thought were really important. One is the use of the word you in the New Testament. This book talks about how oftentimes when we read the New Testament, we read the word you to mean just us, but the word you is actually being used as a plural you. So when the apostles or the disciples were writing their letters, they were writing it to a body of people. And we often read that to think, okay, this is a message like just for me. I have to do these things. The other thing was the paradigm of honor and shame versus right and wrong. In biblical times, and in much of the world still today, outside of the Western world, they have a paradigm of honor and shame, which is very collective in nature. I do something that brings honor to my tribe or shame to my tribe, my people. What I do reflects on my people. The Western world tends to see things through the paradigm of right, wrong. I'm right, you're wrong. That's more of an individualistic frame that, again, I think impacts how we understand community. But it hasn't always been this way. Again, in biblical times, what I wanted to do for this part of the talk was really look at the early church and say, we're talking about the importance of relationships, we're talking about, okay, now how do we do this? I want us to take a step back, understand the culture that we're living in, because those beliefs are as thick as the air we breathe, right? Sometimes we don't even know it until we take a step back and compare that to what it looked like in the early church. The Christ followers who were literally walked with Jesus when he was here on earth, and then he died. And these are the people who went around saying, hey, we walked with this guy Jesus when he was here. Now let us tell you about what he taught us. Let us share with you this vision of life that he painted for us. And when we do that, we see relationships that I think are quite different than what we experience today. So these believers saw community as essential to the faith. The idea of a faith that lives only in your head and your heart would have been foreign to them. And I would say it should be foreign to us. Community was inseparable from faith. They saw church as a people, not a building. I think if you walked around Oconomowoc and said, hey, I'm going to church, like everyone would kind of know what you meant, that it was probably a building somewhere and it was for like an hour or so on a Sunday. They didn't think of it that way. They thought of the church as a people doing life together. When we say God's kingdom, what comes to mind? Heaven? For me, I kind of think heaven, like this far away, removed place that, when I die, like I hope I go there. The Bible tends to talk about God's kingdom as, yes, that, but also breaking into the here and now. It's a family. The Bible often talks about God's kingdom as a family of people who are bearing the image of Christ. And as we go around bearing the image of Christ in relationship with each other, living out the cruciform life, the heaven breaks in. The kingdom of God breaks into the here and now as we are going about living our lives. It's not just something that's far removed or for the future. I've touched on the idea of salvation as a prayer focused on our individual destiny, as opposed to partnering with God in the here and now in the renewal and restoration of all things. This was really significant to me, I don't know, probably 5 years ago or so when I started to get this, and as opposed to thinking, okay, I pray this prayer, I'm going to heaven and I'm going to try not to sin and live a holy life. No. God calls us right here and now to partner with him and join in his work as he brings about his kingdom here on earth. His heart is for the renewal and restoration of all things. And we live that out in community with other people. So yes, we need to abide with him, and yes, we need our quiet time, but then we go work it out in our relationships. And they saw faith as a way of life that involved a radically self-sacrificial community built on deep, authentic relationships. So these are the people who walked with Jesus, and they said to everyone else, okay, now come and see. We're going to start a new movement. We're going to start a new church. Here's what community looks like. Here's what life looks like in this. So here's the verse I want to share with you now that we've kind of painted a picture for what's going on in Acts 2. It says, all the believers were together and had everything in common. Again, the very first believers. This is the church. This is arguably the truest vision for the church that we have. They sold property and possessions to give to anyone who had need. Every day they continued to meet together in the temple courts. They broke bread in their homes and they ate together with glad and sincere hearts, praising God and enjoying the favor of all people. And the Lord added to their number daily those who were being saved. So what do we see here? Anyone want to point out, anyone want to raise their hand? Anything stuck out to you in this passage about what we're talking about? Holding everything in common, yeah. They held everything in common. So these guys shared all of life together. They were concerned for each other. They empathized with each other. A lot of things my mom was talking about. They sought each other's best interests. They met each other's needs because they knew each other's needs. You can't meet someone's needs. I mean, you can donate to like an organization or a group, but it's very different if you're meeting someone's needs because you know them. Maybe you know them so well they don't even have to ask. You just know them and you're being vulnerable with them and they are with you and you're able to meet their needs because you're present in their life. And they shared everything. Like they shared their resources. The idea, the way that we live with like our pantries and our closets and our abundance of material possessions would have been foreign to them. We have way more than they do. They had much less and they shared everything to make sure everyone's needs were met. So that to me is, again, stands in contrast to our culture. They broke bread together every day. Can you imagine having people over to your house every single day to eat meals together? Again, this is just how they lived life. I have a quote on this point that I really liked. Do any of you know Shauna Nyquist, the author? Okay, she's one of my favorite authors, yeah. And her book, Bread and Wine, she talks all about life around the table and what happens when we invite people over and we open our homes and embody radical hospitality and generosity. And there's a really good quote that I think ties in well here. She said, what's becoming clearer and clearer to me is that the most sacred moments, the ones in which I feel God's presence most profoundly, when I feel the goodness of the world most arrestingly, take place at the table. It's not actually strictly about food for me. It's about what happens when we come together, slow down, open our homes, look into one another's faces, and listen to one another's stories. It happens when we enter the joy and the sorrow of the people we love, and when we join together at the table to feed one another and be fed. And while it's not strictly about food, it doesn't happen without it. Food is the starting point, the common ground, the thing to hold and to handle, the currency we offer one another. So I just love that, because when we invite someone to our table, we invite them into our lives. Like, we're sharing our stories with them, they're sharing our stories with us, and something really special happens. I think it's the foundation for fellowship and community. They devoted themselves to the apostles' teachings. This is one that I didn't pick up in this verse the first couple times that I read it, but this is really significant. The apostles were the people who had walked with Jesus, right? The apostles' teachings were very different than the culturally religious accepted norms at the time. You had the Pharisees that were really, and the Jewish culture was very tied to the Old Testament law. You had the apostles teaching about a rebel Messiah who went up against the cultural norms and the cultural truths and what all of the churches. It would be like going up against what all of the mainstream churches are teaching today. They were devoting themselves to a radically countercultural way of being in community with each other, where they shared everything and they followed this guy named Jesus. So they were, again, pushing up against widely accepted religious truths. The kingdom of God is a family that included non-Jews. That was huge, right? These guys were being called to constantly be surfing the margins of society and bringing in those who were marginalized and sharing resources and sharing life with them. That was not kosher. That was very taboo at the time. But because they were following in the life of Jesus together, that's the community that they embodied. A quick question I put in here just for us to kind of ponder and grapple with that stuck out to me is, in what ways might we cultivate authentic community that pushes up against the norms of our day? Perhaps even the norms of our Christian culture. Just kind of interesting to think about. And lastly, from the verse, it stuck out to me that the Lord added to their number daily. So what I'll say with this is, this way of living worked. Not because they had fancy churches or buildings. Like, again, they were just starting from scratch here. They didn't have ministries, kids programs, all that stuff. They just were living it out, and God brought more believers into the family of God because they were living in a way that allowed his kingdom to break through. So people saw how they lived relationally, they saw how they shared everything, and they broke bread together, they held everything in common, and because of that, God's family grew. All right, I really like quotes, so I've got one more. Oh wait, nope. Yeah. Although this young and thriving church has no political influence, property, fame, or wealth, it is powerful. Its power is centered in the living gospel. People value one another more than possessions. They come together as a large, passionate, healthy family where it is natural to pray and share all of life together. The kingdom of God is blossoming on earth as these lovers of God embrace the teachings of Jesus. In the days ahead, the church will lose much of its initial beauty and appeal. It will become consumed with a desire for material possessions, cultural influence, and power. That's a commentary from a version of the Bible called the Voice Bible. And I guess it's kind of heavy and disparaging at the end, but it's really cool to see this beautiful picture of the early church that was really focused on what they were supposed to be. So again, we've got a new type of community here. They pray for each other, they get to know each other's needs, they meet each other's needs, they share resources, they break bread, and they learn to walk like Jesus together. So what might this look like for us? Some things it doesn't mean. It doesn't mean trying harder. So if you heard Mac's sermon 2 weeks ago, he talked about like getting off of the treadmill of self-improvement. There's a really good blog post that he did on that on our website. If you haven't met it, I highly recommend it because it ties in really well here. It doesn't mean going to try to get more relationships and trying really hard to be authentic and trying to be vulnerable and doing all the things my mom talked about. It means submitting to God and letting him reshape our framework for understanding how we live community again and partner with him in his work. It doesn't mean adding stuff to our calendars. It doesn't mean getting more friends and becoming more popular. It does mean discerning where God might be inviting us to embody this kingdom community way of living, one of radical hospitality and radical generosity. It means upside down relationships. What I mean by that is not just relationships that are for ourselves, but relationships that truly seek the good of others. So I believe that when we have these relationships, we will be more fulfilled and less lonely and all the things that my mom talked about, but we're also doing it because we're seeking the good of those around us. And it means, I think, taking a humble posture as we recognize where we are operating out of cultural assumptions that may or may not comport with the true meaning of the gospel, and recognizing where we're imparting our own individualistic understandings about how we see our faith, and trying to just be open and humble and open-minded, saying, okay, God, help me understand what you're trying to say to me through your word, as opposed to approaching these scriptures with automatic assumptions about what I think they might mean, because I've always been taught that way, or because I've read it a million times, and yeah, I know what you're saying here. But really stepping back and go, okay, God, help me to take fresh eyes to look at your gospel and understand what you want me to take from it. And in the end, we're doing this because that's the cruciform life that I believe Jesus invites us into. If we do these things, again, I think we will be happier and more fulfilled and more relationally connected and all of those things. But at the end of the day, we do that because we're following Jesus, and that's what he invites us into. And I think that's just a beautiful picture of the cruciform life. So that's all I got.